Hello.
Hello, hello. Yes, I think it's just probably going to be you and me today. So um I don't have too much uh but let me set up this real quick. Why did that what just happened? Why does that do that? I don't understand. Okay. All right. March 31st, 25. And then let's copy this. Hopefully it doesn't do this weird thing again. All right, that looks like it worked. And then this, oops. All right. Um, I know that you just posted a comment on this issue. So I'd like to talk about it to kind of see where we're at. Gotcha, gotcha. This is more about like how you would use this event, right?
Yes, and how to use it, and yes,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that would probably be um company specific as well, but how I imagine it, because it's however they want to measure completion, right? Especially for Dora. But if Dora is saying it's the first initial commit of the project, I imagine however your company does that is whenever you start a project, that first commit that you send for that project would be this event. However this is hooked up into the system will need to be figured out, but that's
I-
outside
I-
of the
it's not the first commit of a project. It's the first commit of a feature or any change in reality, because the purpose of the
yeah, project, yeah,
LTC,
project is any of those things that you just listed. I just used project because I didn't want to list those things. I just meant like any one of those things. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. So like yeah, it's a new feature, et cetera, because you're measuring the lead time, right? So
yes,
so I'm wondering, like I said, I don't know if that really is for the spec to figure out too much. I think we just need to provide it, and then we need to think about, how tools are going to use it. I'll give you a good example, right? Like the source control ones, right? There was no, we created the source control event without figuring out how to do that, right? So I think it's kind of the same thing. We just have the events, um, have them make sense first, and then figure out how to implement them. I think is kind of the process. Um, and I think as long as we get the event right, figuring out, when do you send this event can be answered, during like an implementation of a tool, for example, like in the implementation state, we can even try to go ahead and answer those. I'm not saying that those questions are not important, but I feel like it's a little out of scope for the event itself. We definitely want use cases, but we don't, when we're talking about specs, we don't want to go into the implementation of things. If
yes, but for me it's important. I will explain why. Um, I start to implement some of the use cases that we list, and often I have to do some to some expectation of my own, like how to define ID, how to create this correlation between events. It's something important, and how I have to compute, because there is some missing details into
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
specification. So it's why I would like we start maybe to think about how to use, because we provide use cases, but at very high level,
Mhm.
and we fully ignore implementation details. And Evil is in the details, and it's how it will make the specification easy to use for producer of event and also for maybe consumer.
Well, I understand. I'm not saying it's not important, but coming up with the spec itself, the spec just needs to be um uh I guess sound or valid, right? Having all the necessary details, etc. But in terms of the implementation, that's another process like in itself, right? And there's always multiple ways of solving it or solving a particular problem. Well, for these type of things, right? And so I think, like I said, I really want to keep that separate when we're talking, when we're in the spec, when we're in spec issues in particular, just because I feel like, this, if we're going to go into implementations, people are going to be very opinionated. People are going to have their own way of they wanting to do things. And at that point, like no one's going to ever agree on one single solution. Is or one single solution along with one single spec once we start to reflect that, right? So I think it's better to first come up with the spec to weed out other solutions that might not work and then kind of work backwards from the spec to a solution, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And what we can do too, David. So, like I said, I'm not saying that this question is not important. What we can do is, whenever we have questions like this, we can add this to the next agenda item for the implementation SIG. Would that be a better approach? And then what we also can do is, whenever a new was it a new spec comes in, maybe also the implementation SIG needs to come up with how it's used, like in tandem, right? Together. So that way we're kind of working synchronous. I know that's going to be the ideal case. We're probably going to be out of sync a lot of the times, actually, most times, if not always. But we will try our best. Like when a new event is being proposed, we'll start asking those questions. So when the time comes to implement them, we'll have them answered. Is that a better flow for you? Would that work better?
Yes, yes. I use this ticket to discuss this topic with the visa, because I know he tried to implement it, so it's also by curiosity, because he
Gotcha,
defined
gotcha. Okay, okay.
some
Sorry,
field,
sorry.
etc. So I'm
Okay,
also curious, because it's a
just curious.
to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
my use case, I need this this
Okay.
new event. So I would like to try to challenge, I could say.
Yeah, yeah.
What,
Let me.
because I would like to avoid that we start to create maybe also events that will not match the purpose or etc. So it's
Right, right, right. Okay, so I'm gonna add this on the next agenda for let's see, I think it's tomorrow actually, right?
yes,
Yeah, yeah. So it's April 1st.
and maybe I will not be available. I have a meeting and maybe
Oh yeah, yeah. No worries.
few
Just
minutes.
yeah, just let me know. And if not, we can always
It should be okay, but I don't know.
okay, okay. Okay, but I definitely like this approach is where we start working in tandem and we start trying to figure out how to implement these things. But I think also too, um, specifically for the spec sig, right? What the big question should be is like you said, is like, how to use these events, but less from an implementation standpoint, but more from an interoperability standpoint is what I'm getting at. So like, how can you know, this event be used across different tools without changing the behavior, right? So if we swap out tool A for tool B, right, we want to make sure that that event is is described in such a way that that behavior doesn't change. It always has the same output, right? So the same input event should have the same output events, or et cetera, right? So I think that's a question that we really need to start thinking about and driving the focus for CDEvents to really have it succeed. So I want to make that maybe a topic when Andrea is here, kind of figure out how we can start thinking about that question and making that like kind of like a primary goal as well.
Yes,
So
and maybe provide more examples, I could say, about how existing events
mhm.
could be translated. As you know, I work on one translator, and part of the CDEvents is to use package PURLs to define package, etc. And as part of their spec, they say when you try to express a new get package, follow this schema and these samples. When it's a Docker image, use this one. When it's an OCI image, use this one. And there are some differences that are, especially for OCI, because I use this one where I say, oh, it doesn't, by reading just the specification, I will not implement it the way it is defined in the examples for OCI. And they say for OCI, you have to do this and that. So
Oh, right.
they provide more concrete stuff, and it helps a lot to say, oh, okay, I have to use, and it's for OCI, it's always in this case. And today in our samples, it's very generic, I could say. I mentioned the source field, where we say source is a URI starting by dash, and the source and the ID are correlated, should be unique. The tuple source plus ID should be unique, but it's the case for the source and the ID in the context, but it seems to be also the case for the source and the ID in the subject, but the ID
Mhm.
of the subject is not the same as the ID of the context.
Right.
So but in all our examples, source is just slash source 1, 2, 3, 4,
I mean, yeah, it could
etc.
be anything. Yeah, it could literally be anything in
Yes.
the subject. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's another thing. We need to be more opinionated. So let's actually start making some of this. I think this is a good thing to call out goals for CDEvents. So let's call that out. So be more specific in the CDEvents themselves.
Yes. At least I guess what will be really interesting, it's that it will challenge ourselves about the spec.
Yeah, agreed.
Uh, by Andrea is part of the Tecton team, if I remember correctly. So it will be nice to see how Tecton implement those CDEvents, because for the same kind of events maybe used by GitHub for the GitHub workflow, or by GitLab, we will be able to match, and then consumer of those events could read could read the same way all events.
Mhm. Right. Okay. So yeah, I think I mean I wish okay. So yeah, let me think about um how we can start thinking or how we can outline these goals. Because I think these two are very critical. Be more specific and start thinking about how to swap tools, e.g., this is interoperability, right? Is there any other goal that you would like to see from this SIG specifically, the spec SIG?
Mm. No, yeah, be more specific and maybe more examples. It could be.
Oh, good
I
point.
think it
Yeah, there is no examples right now. Yes.
no
More.
real examples. We provide
Yeah.
example of syntax, but without meaning.
Yeah, exactly. More more real world examples.
Yes, exactly. More real world
Yeah,
examples.
yeah, exactly. Okay, okay. Yeah, I agree 100%. Actually, when I was like trying to make a slide deck internally for CD events, I was like, oh, let me go pull some examples, like real world example. I couldn't find anything. So I was just like, oh, this is not useful. So yeah, agreed. So we need, okay, so this, I think in my opinion, what we should start doing is every time we meet in the six, so every week, we try to get a little bit closer to these goals. So, we can start with being more specific. And, I think these two right here are probably the most important, right, for getting CD events to actually mean something. And so we can start thinking about that for going from week to week. And I think too, by becoming more specific, we will start to understand like how swapping tool, what would happen if we swap tool A for tool B, right? Because right now, if you swap tool A for tool B and it produces a completely set of different CD events, that system will behave completely different, right? So it's not really clear how CDEvents works in terms of the full ecosystem of of interoperability. But I think just answering, how to be more specific, maybe by becoming more specific, we start to ask questions like, oh, maybe this event needs to be a little bit more flexible, or maybe this event needs to be multiple events, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can start with being more specific while having this question in the back of our minds and kind of start working towards that. Um, but yeah, I'll think about this question, and I might do like a little bit of a presentation next week to kind of outline maybe a path forward on how we can solve this within CD events. And see what this means for us like in the future, because I think it's really, yeah, right now, like you said, like we're not specific at all, and because of that, like I said, tool A and tool B might have a completely different idea on what subject source means, right? So it's like they might not even understand the fields the same, so we need to be very, very clear. So this only hurts interoperability. Okay, so I think that's a really good call out. And yeah, more real world examples, but that can come after, I mean, we should create them as soon as we can, but I think first we should probably get the events right. Or at least like get one event right, one sequence events, like just get the build events right, and then answer those questions. And then once we get those right, we can start thinking of like real world examples. And I think from now on too, let me know if you're okay with this. From now on, if a new event comes in, they must provide like real world examples with it. Like, what do you think about that? I personally like that.
Yes, and I guess it was the case because when we look at the test case artifact,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
pushed by the test cube team, I guess.
Hmm.
They are the only implementer, so they should have they know how to real examples looks like, and it's probably the same for the Tecton,
Yeah, yeah.
etc. And it's also allow me to another topic. So Tecton and TestCube are native CDEvents producer, but it's not the case. The majority
Yeah, yeah.
of existing tools, I guess they will not they will maybe not become native in native quickly, or maybe at some points, because current events, if I look, I work a lot with GitHub events today,
Hmm.
those days, and they provide a lot of more information and
Oh,
data.
yeah, yeah.
So, and there are a lot of ecosystem of tools using those specific events. So it, we will need to have a clear definition of how stuff are translated from one to another point.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely,
So,
definitely. GitHub's API, it provides, yeah, a lot of information. And I think that just kind of shows all the information that we don't have, right? Because if you look, right, if we go to like CD events, dev, and we go to like any of the our source control events, let's just go to like change created, for example, right? We only have these four things, right? Which these are just all by default, right? So really you only have these two things. But if you go to like the GitHub API and go to like a commit or a PR or any of those, let's see.
You have 10 fields for the repository, 10 fields for the
Exactly, right?
sender, 10, a bunch of fields. I capture some events. I generate some events and I capture them on my on the
Yeah, look at
public.
this. Look at all this info you get.
Yes, uh,
So,
uh, and I pick some of them to create the CD events, at least for workflow, etc.
mhm. But yeah, but obviously like these things are missing, right? Um like a commit ID. We don't need to call it a commit ID. We just can call it a change ID, right? And that can be any ID that's associated with the change, right? Like that is missing, and I think that's like a requirement in my opinion. Like a change ID could be, the repo name, for example, there's a lot of stuff that we can do there, or PR, for example. Um, that and then author associations pretty nice. But yeah, we also don't have any user information in this like at all as well, which I don't know how important that is. That's probably pretty important. So I would probably want that if I was an end tool. Um, to at least for some level, at least for visual, like being able to visualize, who committed what would be really, really nice. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of information here. And then we literally only have two fields. One, which is this would be like the commit message, right? Which is nice, but if you have a commit message with like, and then you need to go to like the ID and then like know that this is a commit, um, you know, that would be like the only way. But then you have to like pair that with source. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a pain. I don't know. Like I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, I think, what we need to start doing as part of these spec authors is looking at real tools like GitHub, for example, when we're creating these events and extracting whatever base information when we're creating these events, right? And maybe that's something we should do when we're talking about being specific is let's say we start with source control because that's the starting point. Well, tickets are a starting point, but we'll start at source control. And we look at GitHub and see what we're missing and then figure out, what other things we can add and becoming more specific as well. But I think these events need to be are missing a lot and also need to, be changed in such a way where, we add more information. But yeah.
I'm not sure we need to have all the information.
Yeah, not everything.
It,
Yeah.
it really depends on the use case that CD event should cover.
Yeah, definitely.
So
But
today maybe it's good with the two information to create the dashboard or everything. Maybe
mhm,
it's enough for it. It's why being clear of for which use cases we CD events. What is the purpose of CD events? On
mhm.
which the purpose is not to replace existing API. It's what I would like to say.
Yeah, exactly. It's to make tools interoperable, right? But like for example, if a tool is consuming this GitHub API, right? What information is it using to do something? Like for instance, if you have Jenkins, right? What is it using? Well, it's using this commit ID, right? And it's pulling all the information from the commit ID to do a build, right? Or to run tests. So, and it probably needs to know, maybe the user, maybe does some sort of authorization based off the user. I don't know. But I think this is, there's some things in here that we can probably extract. Well, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. But that's what I mean. We should probably start with the real world events. And I think when we propose new events, like for instance, if we go to our source code repo right now, right, we have spec. We
Yes.
don't really have, let's see here, operations, we're source code. See, we don't really have, yeah, exactly. So we don't have what this was inspired by, what tools were used, why we chose what we chose. But I think the testing events might be a good example as well, because no, it doesn't. Okay. But yeah, I think there needs to be more information there to give people an understanding of like the intention of the event itself as well, as we're creating them. But maybe that could be the description. But I don't know. I'm just kind of like rambling right now, trying to figure out what we can do to kind of help the events themselves. But yeah, I think starting and looking at these events may make sense. Um, because like you said, we definitely don't want to replace the APIs, but we want to make it so we provide enough information for anything that's consuming it to do something useful, right? So if we look at a tool like um, Jenkins API, I'm curious to see, because I'm not too familiar with Jenkins, how it ingests source control. Yeah, I would have to probably do this later, but it might be a good idea to look at the thing that's consuming it, right? And seeing how it uses it to figure out what needs to be populated in that event, right? Because I think a lot of the times when we're creating source control events, we're just looking at GitHub, right? But we're not looking at the things that are consuming it, which is the important bit for interoperability. So I think we need to start thinking about that as well. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I ranted a little bit for there, or rambled there for a little bit, but ramble slash ranted. But yeah, I think, I think that's gonna be the plan. I think next week what I will do is I'll create a slide deck presentation around these three goals, and kind of like what we can do to get there, to get to interoperability, to get to where we're not vague and being more specific. So yeah, so that'll be next week. If not, if no one's if people are unable to attend, then I'll push it out for the following week. But I'll have the slide deck ready for next week though.
Good. Great.
Okay, awesome. Well, I had nothing else. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, no, no.
Okay,
I
well then,
think
yeah,
it's enough.
all right, let's call it early then. And thanks again, David. I'll talk to you tomorrow
Thanks.
then, all right?
Yes.
All right, have a good one. All right, bye.
Bye.